Conducted by the Committee on Appropriation and Adjudication will come to order. Notice of this public hearing was disseminated to all local media outlets via electronic format on April 22nd, with a second notice provided on April 27th. Notice of the hearing was also made known on the Guam Legislature's website. We have one bill on the agenda. It's Bill 301-33, introduced by Senator Frank Aguon. And it is entitled, An Act to Add a New Section 1 N6 to Chapter 5 of Public Law 33-36 relative to providing authorization to the Department of Corrections for overtime payment obligations incurred in prior fiscal years. This bill was introduced on the 21st of April at 3:58. Subsequent to the introduction by Senator Frank Aguon, he also wrote to the Speaker and asked the Speaker to declare this to be an emergency because it was our understanding, or at least Senator Aguon's representation to the Speaker, that there was a Department of Labor complaint that had been filed by the DOC guards, and that there was a court order that was going to make it mandatory with additional fines. He wanted the Speaker to waive the public hearing, declaring it an emergency. I reminded the Speaker that this could and would not satisfy as a public emergency to have waive the hearing. So I immediately scheduled a hearing for lunch today so that we would have the 5 days to have the hearing. I understand that from the news media that checks have gone out and there have been some payments. I just wanted to go through with this hearing so that we would have a hearing on record as having done this. And Senator Aguon had asked for a waiver, which I would not have supported. And I told him that I committed to having a hearing at the earliest possible date, and the earliest possible date was 5 days, was today at noon. And so we're having this hearing. I am disappointed that no one came from DOC, and I understand that I have a statement from the Director of Administration, but she's not present. Are you going to testify, or should I just read it into the record? You'll speak? Okay. I'll read oh. Hi, Christine. Thank you very much, Ms. Belito, for appearing this afternoon. Have a seat. That's all right. Okay. Thank you very much. Why don't you go ahead and read your testimony?
Okay. Buenas and Hafide, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to submit written testimony or oral testimony on Bill 301-33. The Department of Administration has processed checks for outstanding overtime from pay period August 8th through October 3rd, 2016 for fiscal year 2015, totaling $579,943. In addition, we also process current fiscal year 2016 overtime from pay period January 23rd through April 2nd, 2016, totaling $815,997.90. These checks are now ready to be distributed and will be distributed actually by 1 p.m. today. The fiscal year 2015 overtime payments had already been encumbered in that year, and thus the release was a matter of securing the funds to do so. We sincerely appreciate the efforts of Senator Aguon and the Guam Legislature in acting quickly to ensure that there were no obstacles in taking care of this issue. Thank you. Sito Smasi.
Was there a typo here?
I don't know. It was just done this morning. On which one?
The dates, 10/3/2016. We haven't even
Or
gotten
for that period? Oh, no, that's 2015. It is a typo. Yes.
Okay. And I'm disappointed that your fellow cabinet member, the director of corrections, didn't come, because I need to know, and the chairman wanted to.
I spoke with him yesterday, and he said he was going to be here.
And the chairman needs to know. You guys are lucky at DOC to have him as your champion. I mean, he was trying to waive the committee rule, the hearing rule, and I jumped out and said no, I would have a hearing so that we could have this on the record and no one would say that we did this without a hearing.
Right.
And we just want to know, is there anything else that hasn't been paid? Because we keep getting surprises. It's every other day, it seems, the number changes.
From my understanding, Gil is our chief payroll officer. He received this information from DOC, and this is supposed to take care of everything outstanding up to date as of the April 2nd pay period.
And that would be for payday today anyway? No.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any outstanding pay obligations at DOC that need to be addressed?
Okay, Gil's just informing me we just received the 416. Which one is that? I need super glasses for this. How much is that?
It's updated.
Oh, so then that would change the number.
Up to 980.
I'm sorry, Vice Speaker. We're going to have to update our written testimony to include the 4/16/2016 inclusion. So the total will now be 988,006.28.
So it included the most recent pay period, which the checks would have been released today.
That's correct, sir.
And all the a DOC guard, Mr. Hill?
Sir.
To Hill. Have a seat. Let's hear if he has his check yet.
No, not until 1, sir. Is it 1?
There is an outstanding still, sir, 2012 and 2013. It was known as over the cap at that time. Each officer was, depending on their rank, was only allotted so much overtime. After that...
Slide the mic a little closer. You don't need to eat it, but just at least closer.
After that amount, whatever the officer was allocated, it'd be banked as put over the cap. Later in 2013, the cap was taken away, but they never paid what was over the cap. In my own record, which I have exactly 361 hours of overtime they haven't paid.
Are you familiar with this over the cap issue?
No, Mr. Vice Speaker, that's actually DOC administration that was doing that over the cap, and DOE is not familiar with that, sir. We were not aware of that.
Okay, well, you now have a new task of trying to figure out what this over the cap issue, and to find out if they're from any other agencies, because every other day, he introduced 6 bills the other day for GPD, trying to take care of prior years.
For overtime as well?
And paid every type of compensation. And we cannot run this way.
Yes.
I mean, this is impossible. I feel like I'm chasing my tail around. I thought I got it, and then all of a sudden I sprouted another tail, and I'm chasing that one. This cannot continue. You need to get them into your office and once and for all sign in blood, with the blood of their first child, that this is the last request that they're going to be making.
So it's just DOC and GPD, or were there other law enforcement agencies?
All the law enforcement agencies that somehow are now coming up and saying that we neglected to pay them, we promised them some compensation that hasn't been paid. At some point, the committee has to know. We may not have the cash, and I may not do the appropriation or the authorization to pay for it, but at least have it somewhere so that we know we have this obligation that we have to address.
Okay.
And not pull up and there's another mole is going to come up. And I feel like playing whack-a-mole. I thought I had it, and there's a new mole that has now jumped up. 5 of them at GPD, and another one at DOC. We've got to figure out how we completely extinguish all of these obligations, and you'll have to figure out where you're going to get the cash for it, but at least we're addressing it. And again, I mean, I thank, well, not necessarily thank him, but Senator Aguon is very good advocate for all of you and just pushing it and wanting to even waive the rules. He wanted this on the agenda last week. And we scheduled this hearing so that after today's hearing, I could put this on the agenda for this afternoon. But thankfully, you've taken care of this, I hope. He hasn't gotten his check.
Well,
but
they
it's not
are
1
ready.
o'clock.
I assure, right, Gil? They're ready. They are ready. They will be released
And-
at 1
and-
o'clock.
And you're not going to pull the rug out from under me, and after I rule, have this hearing, all of a sudden go, "Oh, I guess I'm not going to release the checks, and these guys are going to go up there and find no checks."
No, we will have the checks. Now, we don't know anything about those prior obligations, but for the 2015 and 2016, the
And I
checks
thank
are
the
ready.
media for being here, because now it's
Yes.
on camera that
Yes.
if the checks aren't released at 1 o'clock, we have the director saying that the checks are ready and will be released.
Gil, they're ready, right?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Speaker, and Ms. Beleto, Mr. Hill. And sir, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I need to clarify something. The Vice Speaker was absolutely correct when he hinted at the request to be able to forego the rules so that in fact we can get this piece of legislation on the legislative agenda this past few days. But there was a public pronouncement that originated from the Director of Department of Corrections that said without legislative authorization for paying prior year obligations, that he was not going to be able to proceed. Now we're hearing from you that it was processed, just not paid. So
It was encumbered in fiscal year 2015, so
Okay.
basically accrued into the books
Okay.
as a valid expenditure, but we just
okay,
had
so
not got the check.
I'm good with that, Ms. Beleto,
Yes.
and I thank you and the Governor's office for stepping forward and injecting yourselves into this process and making sure that you take care of our corrections officers.
Yes.
You pay them for not only fiscal year 15, but also fiscal year 16, and make it current as of the 16th of April.
Yes.
If you take a look at the piece of legislation, and Mr. Chairman, I need to highlight this because the committee did request a FOIA of any and all outstanding obligations. And this over the top is also an issue that has to be clarified in terms of what the overall costs. The title refers to overtime payments for obligations incurred in prior fiscal years. If you take a look at sub-item number 6, prior year obligations authorization, it refers to prior year obligations, not necessarily specifically to overtime. And I bring that up because based on the response that was provided, and I want to thank the Director of Corrections for providing this information based on the FOIA request. But Ms. Beleto, you still have a couple of vendor obligations that are due. One is dated, I believe, September 2015. Another one is dated September 2011. We also have other claims similar to Mr. Hill. We have a vendor obligation to GMH of approximately $493,000 accumulated in fiscal year 15. Another vendor, I'm sorry, this is corrections officer obligation. Are you familiar with the 8086 civil case? in which 13 officers from the Guam Police Department had filed a claim that in fact anything in excess of, there was a formula that was applied previously of allowing up to 43 hours before law enforcement officials were able to accumulate or accrue overtime. Well, incidentally, that was challenged. The court came back and said anything in excess of 40 hours a week or 80 hours per pay period is considered overtime. So there was a ruling. GPD was able, with Chief Cruz, was able to identify the resources to pay the 13 individuals that filed that case. There's still a pending obligation on the part of Guam Police Department that the chief, I know, is working with BBMR to identify the funds. That is also another issue that is affecting our officers, corrections officers at the Department of Corrections. So if in terms of looking at the legislation and the authorization that it otherwise would have provided, and that's why I'm disappointed that the Director of Corrections is not here today, because acknowledging in a letter that he forwarded, and Mr. Chairman should have received a copy of this early this morning because we just received it yesterday evening, looking at acknowledging all of these prior year obligations and not stepping forward and requesting that in fact this authorization be provided, unless it's going to fall under the guise of what you just used as the justification to pay our corrections officers for fiscal year 15, that it was an obligation accumulated, it was booked and whatnot. But these are outstanding obligations that are due by the Department of Corrections that really need to be addressed also. And if finding the funds, the question that I wanted to present to the director is, if these are already incurred in the books, you're waiting to find the cash, and you have the authorization, then by all means. These, once DOA and BBMR identifies the resources, then they can be paid out as quickly as possible. But if in fact there's legislative authorization necessary, then that's where we need to step in. But like the Vice Speaker, the Chairman said, you know, it's not hearing it, seeing it in writing today, and then hearing tomorrow that no, we don't need legislation, and then the next day it being brought forward again and say, yes, we do need legislative authorization. So if we can get and understand exactly what legislative support you need to be able to allow you to process these checks and pay these vendors and pay our corrections officers, aside from what you've already paid out or you will be paying out today, then please let us know as quickly as possible, because that's our job. But how can we do our job in serving our people and serving corrections officers and assisting you if in fact we don't recognize or we're not informed of exactly what the requirements are? So please, if I can ask you to request from DOC, or my office can also send you a copy of what they provided yesterday. I'm sure that you were probably part of the conversation. Mr. Chairman, a copy has been sent to yourself as well as all the other senators. There are outstanding obligations in prior fiscal years. We need to try to address these as quickly as possible. If legislative authorization is necessary, we need to know, aside from the overtime payment that you have paid. So I just want to say thank you and thank Governor Cavo for taking care of our corrections officers for fiscal year 15 and fiscal year 16, because this is now setting a new standard that, having addressed this, then as members of this body, we need to work with your office, BBMR, and the governor's office to also work with Chief Cruz so that likewise they can take care of other obligations in the Guam Police Department. Okay, so thank you very much, Ms. Boleto. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you,
Mr. Hill, did you explain the over the cap?
I explained most of it, but like I said, it started off back in 2012 and 13. And we were given memos where each rank would be specific to how much overtime they could accumulate.
Do you know how many officers may be affected with the over-the-cap process?
I couldn't give you a
But we know for a fact that in your case you have a claim.
For mine alone,
have you officially submitted a request to...
361 hours.
So you have officially submitted your request to
The
the director for his review?
Yes, sir.
And that was recent, or was that...
I have done it numerous times, actually for emergency purposes, for medical or death in the family, where I would get some of my prior year overtime, but I would never get answers on the over the cap.
So it was not recognized as an obligation, or you just did not receive any response?
I just didn't receive any response until I received a check for a couple pay periods.
So that acknowledged that in fact over the cap was due.
In my opinion, yes. Because my warden would sign off on my memo, which states on my memo all overtime from 2015, 16, 2012, and 13 over the cap. I
Mr.
specified
Chairman,
it in
if I
those
can beg your
memos to him.
indulgence, because this is public information that was presented to the director, if I can ask Mr. Hill if he can read for the record the memo that you submitted to the director.
Those memos I have
Because-
in my office right now. I was
What-
in a rush to come here, and I can always
Okay, so
bring
you
them
don't have
down
it on
another
hand.
time. No.
If
Those
he-
were all for emergency reasons, medical reasons when I requested for the overtime.
Okay, I thought you had it on hand, but
No, I don't have those.
not
files
having
with
it,
me.
then please, I will work with the Director of Corrections and see if we can include Mr. Hill, and then eventually it may reach your office,
Okay.
Ms. Beleto, in terms of recognizing whether in fact this is an obligation. And if in fact it's recognized as an obligation, which Mr. Hill is very strongly proposing that it is, then in fact we need to also take similar measures in terms of making sure that he's properly compensated. So we need to work with you on that. And please, all this information, Mr. Hill, if I can ask you to present the chairman, just for his information, a copy of your memo so that in fact he's aware of
Yes, sir.
what you have submitted, because it was brought up today. Well,
Yes, sir.
thank you again. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
I thank Ms. Belita for being here to say that the checks will be ready at 1 o'clock.
Yes.
With that assurance that the checks are ready at 1 o'clock, this committee will not be reporting this bill out. We've had the public hearing, and if the Director of Corrections doesn't feel it important enough to come down and do it, I'm not going to keep my people out from having lunch so that I get a committee report so that we can discuss it this afternoon. If he doesn't think it's important enough to be here, then I guess it's not. And if you assure me that it's been addressed, then it's addressed. So this bill is moot and is now in the files in the committee. This committee will stand adjourned and will be accepting no further testimony on this bill.
Thank you. So you don't need me to revise this? Or